Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to go over some deck options that you can consider for the upcoming qualifier weekend for Explorer Best of 3. Going to preface by saying there's not a lot of data available for Best of 3. Explorer, going in, I would say pick one of three decks. Either go Azorius Control, Rakdos Midrange, or Abzan Amalia combo. Those are going to be the most prevalent decks, I believe. And I think this kind of showing with the stats that we see here from Untapped, from the meta popularity of the day, all holding about a 13 to 15% meta share. I think these are by and far towards the top of the format in terms of effectiveness. Now, I will have to go fairly low on data sets in terms of volume of games, so there's some abnormalities in terms of the data to get really anything. So usually we'll do a little bit more robust, but I'll be completely frank, I wouldn't record this video if it wasn't a qualifier weekend because I'm not overtly satisfied with the volume of data. But because qualifier weekend's here, people are going to be looking for deck lists. I do want to get something out. Again, if I was in the seat, I would play one of the three decks. If you are proficient in Control, I would probably, like myself, I would probably play Control this weekend. I think most people are going to be gunning more, particularly for Amalia combo, and I think Control has the most flexibility going in. So we'll jump into it. I'm not going to do the whole hurrah. I'll paste all these deck lists. The link for Untapped, if you want to use Untapped, is in the video description, but I'll paste all these deck lists, timestamp it, and kind of go from there. Like I was mentioning, for Explorer itself, 3,400 matches of best of 3 were played from Diamond to Mythic rank over the last week. Fairly low. Literally the only time I've seen 20 as the default. If we go to 40 matches, it's basically just a very niche subset. There's a lot of kind of like Smuggler's Copter's a big impact in terms of a lot of the decks in the format that we don't get in Pioneer from here. That's one of the big deviations. So we're actually moving further apart, but so much so that Untapped, when I click on the various decks, we're going to have to reference back to this screen to see the actual win rate percentages because it doesn't populate unless it's over 50. So jumping into it, the first deck is Izzet Phoenix, 75% win rate, 20 games. So again, a lot of this is going to be like, one game going another way or another, like one win or another. I'd focus less on the win rates, more about the potential archetypes that you'll likely see. I do think Phoenix will be present in the format. People like playing this deck. It's very popular across. You'll likely see two variants. You'll see the Izzet version and then the Dimir version, which basically just it's called Grixis Phoenix or Dimir Phoenix. It's playing all blue and black spells just to get, and then it returns Phoenix to the graveyard. But we got access to Izzet Charm that can help with looting. We have the Treasure Cruises now in the format. Pick Lock Prankster is another way to fill your graveyard. And then also as a threat coming back. But the deck itself is a bunch of cantrips, cheap interaction. Lightning Axe is another way to ditch Phoenix, as well as being a 1-mana removal spell that notably hits Shieldred, which is important in the Rakdos matchup, because you drawing a bunch of cards is going to hurt you quite a bit. Some Spell Pierces as Disruption, Brazen Borrower to handle various hate pieces or just a tempo element, and a Thing in the Ice main to kind of bounce. The one card I'm always like, you are extremely optimistic, Izzet players, is the fact that they play 2 Hall of the Storm Giants, a card that takes 7 mana to actually activate, in a deck that's playing 18 lands that has a number of ways to loot away or just get rid of excess lands that you draw, which is always kind of an interesting inclusion in that. Guess it's for like the post-board games where you're expecting to go long, less on Phoenix, and become more of a control deck. Your sideboard itself, you have various removal options. Rending Volley, Abrade, also can hit hate pieces that are artifacts. You have more Brotherhood's End, the Brazen Borrowers is bounce. You have a counterspell package of Disdainful Stroke, Negate, and Mystical Dispute. Crackling Drake gets around the Graveyard Hate. Fable also in the Grandier Mirrors. And then Young Pyromancer. So you could pretty much shift to like an Izzet Control deck, even just kind of like taking out your Phoenixes and then bringing in the threats. You could really reconfigure the manner in which you're playing the deck post-board. Azorius Control is the next deck. We will pull up the win rate. So this is 71.4%. There's 2 versions of Azorius Control, the Yorion version and the Strict Proctor Lotus Field version. Don't have much weight either or. The one card that you'll likely want to consider potentially mainboarding is Temporary Lockdown. It pretty much eats away at the entirety of the Amalia combo, and exiling is more important than killing in that matchup, given that they have Return to the Ranks, which is a powerful effect. We have this version of the Yorion deck, just a bunch of counters, bunch of removal. We're seeing Get Lost in the main, a bunch of cheap counters, Planeswalker package in here, sweepers in Supreme Verdict and Farewell, Stream Trawlers, Shark Typhoon as win conditions. You have the Commit Memory, Narset Lock to basically draw 7 cards and prevent your opponent from drawing cards, and then Memory Deluge as well as Omen of the Sea as card advantage. We're seeing the Restless Anchorage in the mana base, the Hall of the Storm Giants, a couple castles, Field of Ruin as well. Denik is incidentally good against a lot of the graveyard style abilities, decent against like the more aggressive decks as well, but this can shut off Greasefang, so cards in graveyards can't be the target of spells or abilities. It also shuts off the recursion of Rally of the Ranks, so anything that's kind of leveraging that. This will not stop Phoenix because you're not targeting the ability, so the Phoenixes should come back from my understanding. Narset's Reversal for the counterspell matchups, Thought Distortion, style effects, Rest in Peace for Graveyard Hate, post board when you want to be more pressure in the mirrors as well. You can bring in Chromehose Seed Shark just as another threat. In the counterspell heavy matchups, you have Hullbreaker Horror, sweepers between Settle and Temporary Lockdown, and then Mystical Dispute as some more counters. We then move to Rakdos Midrange. So this Rakdos deck is at 68% win rate. Just for reference, there's another kind of variation of the Yorion deck that does have the access to Temporary Lockdowns main. So it's really just a matter of if you want to configure the lockdowns. But we'll go to Rakdos. Again, these are all small sample sizes. They're all like 25 to 40 games. So a couple wins either way is really going to skew the win percentage. So again, focus less on the win rate, more on just kind of what the decks are trying to do. So this Rakdos version, just a lot of hand hate main, Duresses, and Thought Seizes in the main. Fatal Push, Heartless Act as the removal package. Reckoner Bankbuster as some card advantage. You got your Croxa, Kolaghan's Command as another discard. Just a lot of ways to kind of deal with Amalia at instant speed between Bone Crusher, Kolaghan, Heartless Act, Fatal Push. Graveyard Trespasser can you with the graveyard, Fables as well in there. Utility lands, Castle Lockwains, Mutavaults, and then there's more creature lands in Den and Hive of the Eye Tyrant. Your sideboard, just more hand hate. Grafdigger's Cage can deal with Phoenix, can deal with the Amalia combo coming back, so a couple instances there. You have Rending Volleys as removal, Unlicensed Hearse. For Graveyard Hate, Go Blanks, Hand Hate, and Graveyard Hate. Hitazuku for more aggressive Go Wide decks with lots of 1-mana spells. If you run into Sack, stuff like that. Another Kolaghan's Command is a flexible card. Path to Peril for the more aggressive decks. This version of the deck's playing Rampaging Ferocidon, so this would deal with the life gain and shut off the Amalia deck. The other card you might want to consider in lieu of this is Knight of the Dusk Shadow. We'll jump back to it, but Knight of the Dusk Shadow. This is only your opponents can't gain life. And the reason for this is in the Rakdos Midrange deck, you still want to gain your life from Shieldred or Graveyard Trespasser, where this shuts off both players' life. So it's something to kind of consider there. The Knight might be a little bit more of a reasonable card inclusion in there. So kind of considerations there. We have this mono black midrange deck. So this one here is at 60%. Again, 20 games, not a huge sample. So elements of the Rakdos deck, but being mono black gives you the ability to play more Field of Ruin, some Ifnir Deadlands as removal. Similar package, Thoughtseize, Fatal Push. This version's on a couple Bitter Triumphs, Shieldred's Edict, Cling to Dust for some instant speed Graveyard Hate. Gifted Aetherborn can gain you some life and can block big creatures and kind of trade up. Sign in Blood draws you some cards, can also be a burn spell with Shieldred. Deals 6 to your opponent in a way. Trespassers, Schism, Preacher of the Schisms card seen some play in various decks. Draws you cards or creates creatures depending on where your life total stands. Aggro Mauling in the mana base as another removal spell. Kalidas deals with anything dying in exiles. Also just another reasonable lifelink body. Alkazatz is a card that sees some play even in the sideboards of Some of the Rakdos decks that I've seen even in Pioneer, Reasonable Body, Lifelinker, and can't get hit by Fatal Push, attacks opponent's hand, and even if it does die from non-exile, it just comes back. This version, because you're on mono black, is supporting the Invoke Despair package. Sideboard, just Hand Hate, Pithing Needles for activated abilities, Dampening Sphere for like Phoenix style decks. We have the Knight of Dusk's Shadow, as we mentioned, for the life gain, Bankbuster for card advantage, Graveyard Hate, Hand Hate, Graveyard Hate, Sweeper, and Extinction Event as another sweeper. Moving on to Boros Heroic. So this deck's at 59%, 22 games, very small sample size. I personally would not rely on Heroic in a best of 3 format where a lot of people are betting on aggressive or like Amalia combo. And we'll get to Amalia combo in a second. I'll explain once we get to it. But just playing a bunch of targeted pump spells to trigger heroic style abilities. So gets bigger, gets counters, connives, gets counters, has double strike. The big kind of inclusion here is the Monstrous Rage to give trample in addition to Ancestral Anger. This deck can hit very hard, and I had reasonable win rates in best of 1 with it. I just feel like post board you are a little bit more open to removal. And I personally, I've played a lot of qualifiers, especially in Historic with Aura's decks. You mulligan quite a bit at times, at least I find, and because half of your deck really doesn't work without creatures, you oftentimes draw the wrong half or you get a bunch of pump spells that don't actually work. Your sideboard, you have things like Flowstone Infusion, which can be both removal and a pump spell for your creatures, Lauren Escapist Protection, Rending Volley as removal, Get Lost as removal, and Showdown for the heavier removal decks. You can have that as some sustained card advantage. We have 5 color fires. This deck is at 56%. So this is Karuga Fires. So Fires of Invention is 4 mana in this format. Untapped shows the Alchemy version, but Temporary Lockdown's main is actually not a terrible inclusion in this deck, just given the aggressive slant. So you probably have a really tough time against Control. Since they have a lot of sweepers, stuff like that. But on the flip side, you do have access to a lot of removal and grind value for the Rakdos deck. Rakdos can't really deal with enchantments. But you're using the Fires of Invention and then Enigmatic Incarnation to sack small enchantments. So whether it be Fable the Mirror Breaker, the Lockdown when you don't need it, Touch the Spirit Realm, and then you can tutor up other effects. So this lets you go 1+. So you're able then to get Clever Impersonators for the smaller things, Heliod, Shieldred. It also lets you sack 4 mana enchantments to get any of these, Mother Runes, Kenneth, or Tolsmere. And then there's a cool kind of combination where Leyline Binding, 1 mana to cast most of the time because you're activating Domain, but then you can tutor for a 7-drop creature, whether it be Atraxa, Coma, or Titan of Industry. Your sideboard, because you're a Karuga, you can only play things 3 or more mana. So Mystical Disputes for counters, Unmortgaged Ego for combo decks, Leyline of the Void for graveyard hate, A Verdict as a sweeper, and then Thought Distortion for the control matchups. Steal all their stuff. Now, Amalia combo, there was a version here that was listed. It's not really the go-to version. We only have one Sinnoh Scout. We have things like Welcoming Vampire, Sentinel, this Kudzil. This isn't really the version that sees play. So I did go down to Platinum to get a larger population. And the version in Platinum, this one's saying 80%. Again, very small sample size. We're also seeing Mono White at 85%. Mono White's largely been pushed out of the format at this point, unfortunately. But Amalia combo. So the core of the deck is you're using Amalia Benavides, Wild Growth Walker, and anything that gains you life on ETB, whether it be Prosperous Innkeeper, Luminarch Veteran, or anything that could gain you a point of life. By doing that, you create a loop where you keep exploring till Amalia gets 20 power, and then you blow up the board. If you have a Dina out, you can drain your opponent a bunch that way. This version is also including Aetherflux Reservoirs, like an alt win condition. Another way to blow up your opponent. You're using Collected Company, Court of Calling to find your combo pieces. Return to the Ranks can also return stuff back that's died. Note Scout is a way to trigger the Explore, Gilded Goose's Ramp, Lunarch's Life Gain, Selfless Spirit to protect your Amalia, Deep Cavern Bat as kind of a Thoughtseize style effect. It's like Skyclave Apparition could deal with any of the anti-life gain cards, and Extraction Specialist can rebuy something. Sideboard here, you got Fatal Pushes as removal, Haywire Might for Artifact Enchantment hate, Thoughtseize for hand hate, Knight of the Dusk Shadow, again, as a way to stop your opponents, Remorseful Cleric as graveyard hate, Scavenging Ooze as graveyard exile, Voice of Resurgence against heavy counterspell instant-based decks, Artifact Enchantment hate primarily, big mana decks. I guess if you want to be more of a fair deck, you can go Sentinel of the Nameless City, and then Skyclave as removal, kind of all mixed in. That's it for the format. Like I said, I would personally probably, in my opinion, play Control this week, but to each their own, see what you like to play, but anticipate at the very least a large number of Amalia decks, Azorius Control, Rakdos, and potentially Phoenix. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a great one. Stay safe out there.